Hello, I'm the Smoke Show Scarlett Bordeaux, and you're watching Wrestling with Regret.
Nia Jax and Asuka, two women with very different backgrounds who took very different paths to WWE. And quite possibly in this post-Divas era we live in, the two women who get the widest range of reactions from fans. Asuka, formerly Kana, killed it for more than a decade in Japan before signing with NXT, an official developmental territory cum well-funded indie league in 2015. Nia Jax, a former college basketball player and model whose cousin happens to be The Rock, was scooped up 1 year prior. Since debuting on NXT television within a week of each other in October of 2015, both have been shown as dominant wrestlers in different ways, and each have at least one championship to their credit while under the WWE umbrella. But despite these accolades, both of their runs on the main roster could be described most generously as frustrating. Though they've each won titles, their most recent reigns could hardly be seen as positive impact on the product. But despite the name of this channel, we're all about finding the silver linings here. So in the latest of a semi-recurring series, we compare the recent one-time runs by Nia Jax as Raw Women's Champion and Asuka as Smackdown Women's Champion. Using the incredibly scientific process of best of 5, we're going to find out which of these two had the better championship reign. It's been said before, it doesn't matter how well you did in NXT because once you get called up, it means nothing. That being said, let's see how these two ladies fared on the main roster before winning their respective titles. Nia Jax made her way to Monday Night Raw in July of 2016, where she immediately began squashing jobbers in impressive fashion. After winning her first major feud with Alicia Fox, Nia would go on to have prominent matches with Becky Lynch, Alexa Bliss, Bayley, Sasha Banks, and Charlotte, usually revolving around the Raw Women's title or for contention thereof. Despite being booked as a monster most of the time, Nia was portrayed as a final boss to be bested by the other ladies, never able to win the big title matches when it counted. After amassing a record unbeaten streak in NXT and holding their women's championship, Asuka kept her winning ways going upon arriving to Raw in October 2017. Debuting with back-to-back victories against Emma, Asuka then ran roughshod through her competition, even getting a non-title victory over then-champion Alexa Bliss on an episode of Raw. Her other big first-year accolades include being the sole survivor in her Survivor Series debut, as well as winning the first ever Women's Royal Rumble in January 2018, setting up a match with Charlotte for the SmackDown Women's title at WrestleMania, only for her to lose in shocking fashion. The summer of that year saw her lose on 2 occasions to Carmella for the blue and white belt, albeit due to interference by James Ellsworth, master of Snapchat. Asuka's path after WrestleMania 34 was disappointing to a lot of fans, but it's important to remember that everything before that night was still booked very strong. It's safe to say the Empress of Tomorrow wins this round today. Now that both women have had time to rise and fall on the main roster, it's time to see how each of them got their moment in the spotlight. After failing to win the Raw title in a 4-way elimination match at WrestleMania in Orlando, Nia soon aligned herself with Alexa Bliss. She was the Diesel to Alexa's Shawn, or maybe the Sid to Alexa's Shawn, or maybe the Sid to Alexa's softball? Nia helped out her supposed BFF Alexa for months, until it was revealed on a hot mic that Miss Bliss was using Nia and was also caught making fun of her body. It was this Mean Girls level of betrayal that set the stage for their Raw Women's title match at WrestleMania in New Orleans. Nia would leave the Superdome with her first women's title in WWE after a match that saw her crush Alexa's soul with a Super Samoan drop. On that same show, Asuka's assumed coronation was not meant to be, and it wasn't until the final pay-per-view of the year where she ultimately got her due. As part of the main event of TLC 2018, Asuka was seen as somewhat of a third wheel in her TLC match between Becky Lynch and Charlotte Flair. But in the match's final moments, some pivotal interference by Ronda Rousey gave Asuka a clear path to victory, and she ended the pay-per-view standing tall with the SmackDown Women's Championship. There's a certain poetry to Asuka winning the championship at the same pay-per-view she debuted at 1 year prior, but like I've said before in this segment, nothing beats winning the title at WrestleMania. Also, Nia Jax won the belt on her own. In their respective runs, Nia Jax defended her Raw Women's Championship on 2 occasions across 70 days, while Asuka defended her title 3 times across 100 days. It's time to look at each woman's best defense while champion. Ironically, Nia's best match as Raw Women's Champ would be her last for the time being, as she went one-on-one with Ronda Rousey in arguably the highest profile match at Money in the Bank 2018. It was Rousey's first singles match since signing with the company in January, a match that was brought on after one of the most awkward challenges ever put to video.
I have an obligatory title defense at Money in the Bank, and I'm challenging you. Water! No. Somebody give her water. No. Water! Water! Give me water. We gotta go.
Despite neither woman being a ring general, the storytelling in this match was top-notch. The crowd hung on every move in the ring as Nia initially brutalized the challenger, only for Ronda to mount an insane comeback. But before Ronda could make Nia submit to the armbar, Alexa Bliss crashed the party, cashed in the Money in the Bank briefcase she had won earlier in the night, and defeated a jacked-up Jax to win the title for herself. We jump ahead to the 2019 Royal Rumble, where Asuka defended her Smackdown Women's title against the man, Becky Lynch. This opening match was one of the most exciting of the night, as the two ladies exchanged some wild strikes and submission attempts and damn near killed each other on at least one occasion. After a flurry of holds were traded, the champion would beat the challenger in what many consider an upset, making Becky tap out in the middle of the ring. 1 year after winning the inaugural Women's Rumble, Asuka left that same pay-per-view the next year on top once again. This is a tough one to pick. Each match is great for very different reasons. Though the match between Nia and Ronda wasn't as intense as Asuka versus Becky, it told an amazing story. Meanwhile, the Asuka-Becky match felt like an all-out war, not just some well-choreographed David and Goliath story. Also, by that point, the coach wasn't there to shit the bed on commentary like he did at Money in the Bank.
The pace has slowed so much, it's allowing Ronda Rousey to get a little bit of a rest. Gather her senses.
How are you still employed, Coach? That was the dumbest thing I've ever heard in my life.
But the deciding factor here is the outcome of each match. Nia's match with Ronda was memorable, but in the end, it was her last match as champion. Meanwhile, Asuka beat the fastest rising star in the company that time clean as a whistle and retained her title. In my view, that makes Asuka the winner of this round. All good things must come to an end, and with that being said, let's just see how each woman's title reign ended and see which one was a little more dignified. As previously mentioned, Nia would lose her title at last year's Money in the Bank, just not to the woman she was originally wrestling. Alexa Bliss's cash-in got one of the biggest reactions of the night during a match that got some pretty big pops as it was. It took two women and a shiny white briefcase for Nia Jax to go down, but nevertheless, that was the end of her time in the sun. Meanwhile, as WWE was preparing to host their first ever female main event at WrestleMania 35, the powers that be suddenly realized the stakes apparently weren't high enough with just the Raw Women's title on the line. That and 1/3 of the big match, Charlotte needed to look strong going into the pay-per-view. This would spell doom for our pal Asuka. Less than 2 weeks before the big match at MetLife Stadium, Charlotte made a surprise appearance on Smackdown and challenged Asuka for her title. After a great match, it was Flair who came away with the championship, relegating Asuka to a spot in the Women's Battle Royal at Mania. While both reigns met disappointing ends, at least Nia's loss came at the hands of the Money in the Bank winner at Money in the Bank, making the title change mean that much more. Meanwhile, Asuka's already lukewarm title run was sacrificed for the build of a WrestleMania match in a title change that added nothing to either woman's story. Nia clearly wins this round. We're all tied up here, so now we're going to go to the deciding round. We're going to see how Nia and Asuka have been doing in the months since losing their championships and try and determine which one had a better fall from grace. After losing at Money in the Bank, Nia's run as a babyface didn't last much longer, though you could argue she was already waffling back and forth in the build-up. Her biggest singles win since losing the belt was at the Evolution pay-per-view in October, where she stood tall in a very entertaining battle royal. In the following months, she infamously carried the moniker of Facebreaker after unfortunately injuring Becky Lynch a week before Survivor Series. Once the Women's Tag Team Championships came around, Nia paired with Tamina to portray the heavies of the division. This run included a match for the new titles at Elimination Chamber, as well as a fatal four-way for the belts at WrestleMania, both of which were losing efforts. As of this recording, WrestleMania was Nia's last televised appearance before she went under the knife for double ACL surgery. After losing her title to Charlotte, Asuka was placed in a tag team of her own, being paired with former NXT Women's Champion Kairi Sane as the Kabuki Warriors, with Paige here as their mouthpiece. For whatever reason, we haven't seen much of this team on TV since their formation, but as of this recording, they're working a steady house show program with the Iconics, though it sure would be nice to see those championships of theirs defended on television too. On the one hand, it's hard to compare the two in this regard, since Nia worked a lot longer after losing her belt than Asuka has. But even if you adjust for that time difference, Nia still accomplished a lot more as a singles wrestler, for better or for worse, before being placed in a tag team. Asuka never even got that chance. Therefore, the deciding point goes to the Facebreaker herself. Have yourselves a good freakout, Internet! Now this battle could have easily gone the other way, or worse, ended in a draw. The fact is, neither woman's received a truly fair shake since coming to the main roster, before, during, or after their times as champion. The way they handled Asuka's reign on Smackdown was garbage, but at least hers wasn't the centerpiece of some ham-fisted anti-bullying campaign.
You be who you are. Be a star. A bully always gets their ass kicked.
The Empress's entire main roster run could be seen as a huge disappointment. For a time, her entire identity revolved around the unbeaten streak, and when she didn't have that anymore, she was left to wander for a while. Nia's expectations weren't as high, so she didn't have as far to fall, but her entire career has been marred by injuries to her peers, as well as accusations of nepotism, the latter of which I believe is a disservice to her. And when they finally did get a chance to shine as champion, they were each cast aside for bigger stars and storylines. In other words, they were at the right place at the wrong time. Despite the increased focus on women's wrestling in WWE, the female division there is still notoriously one-dimensional, and for the most part doesn't seem to allow for much diversity in the championship scene. While both women have been able to rebound to an extent, it's unclear if or when these two superstars will get another chance at gold, but as of now, Nia Jax can take solace in the fact that her title run was the better of the two, barely. Be sure to give the video a thumbs up if you like it, comment below, subscribe to Wrestling with Regret, and buy the t-shirts at ProWrestlingTees.com. I'm Zane, and I'll see you next time.